Okay, we're away now.
There we go.
Okay, thanks for coming along to our live Facebook Live interview with Jim Savage. Jim is a One Nation candidate running in Queensland. You can tell by the hat. He hasn't hidden his identity here with the hat. It's even personally signed by Pauline Hanson. And he's along with us tonight. We want to talk about the coming Queensland state election. We're going to talk about some of One Nation's policies and some of Jim's background. My name's Graham Park. I'm president of Shooters Union Australia and also Shooters Union Queensland. And so we've been really busy working towards this state election. My own belief and the belief of a lot of other people in the fight for firearms law reform is that this is probably the most important election on the firearms issue we've seen in 25 years because there's a real chance ahead of us with the situation politically in Queensland that we can finally see A, to stop the rot getting any further, and B, improve it so we start to refocus firearms laws on chasing criminal misuse rather than harassing legitimate firearm users, and that's Shooters Union whole point of being. So welcome, Jim. Thanks for being on with us.
Thanks for having me, Graham. Pleased to be here.
Appreciate it very much, and thank you for your patience when we had a few technical issues earlier. Jim's background is he joined One Nation very early after it was formed. What year?
1997.
1997.
Yeah.
And why did you join One Nation back then?
Well, I was a farmer at Beaudesert and a very staunch National Party member, as most farmers are. I was a keen shooter, owned quite a number of firearms, which I still do. And after the 1996 gun buyback and the changes of the laws then, I was so disenchanted with the National Party, who was supposed to be representing me, and they allowed the Liberal Party to bully them into into the changes, which the Nationals themselves didn't believe in, but they did it because John Howard bullied them into it. And I believe that they were listening to John Howard and not listening to me, who was one of their faithful and strongest members. So if the National Party chose to leave me, I had no choice but to look for somebody else. And then, of course, the following year, Pauline Hanson founded the Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party, and I put my hand up and joined straight away and was a member of the Beaudesert branch for quite some time until I moved on and eventually became a member of the executive and then eventually president.
With that, you did become president of One Nation Queensland?
Correct, yes.
And you held that for quite some time.
Nearly a decade, quite some time up until about 2
Jim
years ago.
was 10 years president of One Nation Queensland, so he's got a big background. Now, tell us about the electorate that you're running in. It's in the Laidley area, but what electorate is it?
It's called the LOCKYER, is the name of the electorate, which is the Lockyer Valley, basically, which is Australia's most fertile agricultural region. It's considered the fruit and salad bowl of Australia. Produces about 90% of Australia's winter vegetables. So it's a very, very fertile agricultural area. Like all agricultural areas, the one thing they're screaming for is more water. Obviously, any farmer needs water. And it's a very, very productive area. It's been neglected by successive LNP governments and, of course, the current Labor government. And I want to get in there and make some real differences.
So I understand also in your past as a farmer, you also had a small firearms shop business way back in the day.
I did. While I was farming at Beaudesert, I started a stock and station agency at Inglewood, which is west of Warwick. It was called Graham and Savage. Graham was my cousin, so we started it up, and a part of that was that I was a firearms dealer as well. And I have to thank the late Bill Neuer for helping me get started, and he dropped in and saw me a few times and gave me a few guns to sell and gave me some great advice. He was a true gentleman. He was a lovely man.
And talking on one of the policies that Shooters Union has pushed for a long time is to have increased penalties for people who steal a firearm. And you and I were talking recently, and I understand you had a situation where some firearms were stolen some time ago, and you sort of experienced firsthand this whole thing that the victim gets treated a bit as the problem.
Absolutely.
Can you take us through that a little bit?
I can indeed. In 2009, I was overseas working, and my wife was in Brisbane with the family Christmas, and my house was burgled. They broke into it. Spent quite some time there because the house was vacant over the Christmas period. They brought some tools with them. They actually managed to break open my firearms safe, which was a professionally made safe, and I had a lot of firearms in there. They stole about 4 firearms, left the others scattered all over the place, and it was only about 6 to 9 months ago that I got a call from a detective in Caloundra who advised me that they'd caught the 2 gentlemen involved, the father and son. Now we're talking 8 years after the event, and they caught them both in Victoria. They admitted that they'd stolen the guns because we had DNA and fingerprint. They cut themselves breaking open the safe, so there was quite a bit of blood. So the police said, yes, we caught them in Victoria. We matched them to the fingerprints and the DNA, so we had them pretty much collared for the job. They admitted it, and when asked what they did with the guns, they said they sold them to the local drug dealer. And
is anyone surprised?
Along with all my wife's jewellery and my collection of gold nuggets from many years working in New Guinea. And so I asked the obvious question, well, when am I going to get my guns back, and what's going to happen to these 2 blokes? And they said, we've let them go. It's in Victoria. We don't extradite people for petty crimes like firearms theft. And unless it's a murder or rape, we don't bother going through the paperwork. It's too difficult, too hard. We don't get the support we need from the government to do it, so we just let them go with a warning. So those guys are walking free. And
so let me get this straight. They break into your house. They pretty much destroy your house. They steal all your property, and including your firearms, which they then admittingly sell to a career criminal, a professional drug dealer, which is sort of the one a lot of people you maybe don't want having them.
Correct.
And they decide it's too minor to bother prosecuting.
That's right. They won't extradite somebody.
How do you feel, one as an individual, as a firearms owner when that happened, but the second as a potential lawmaker in the state, a potential representative, how do you feel about that situation, that's treated that way?
Well, I was actually dumbfounded. I didn't realise that they didn't extradite people for property theft. This is what it was, property theft. It didn't seem to matter whether it was a gun or my wife's engagement ring, which they also got. It was just property theft, and they said it's not serious enough to extradite, so they got away scot-free with stealing firearms. I could go to jail if I found with my firearm out in the boot of my car unlocked, not keeping good care of it. And yet these guys stole my guns, sold them to a drug dealer, and nothing. Scot-free.
Jim, it's and folks, David Brown here sitting in the background. The one thing that Graham's repeatedly pushed at various levels has been the concept of, steal a toaster, get your wrist slapped. Steal a firearm, get your wrist slapped. Graham, do you want to talk about your favourite?
Yeah, well, there's no, in Queensland and every state, by the way, there's no practical difference between stealing, in the penalty you'll get stealing a television and stealing a firearm. And when I say that in Queensland, some politician always says, oh, it's actually a different penalty. Yes, technically, the penalty for stealing a firearm in Queensland is the same penalty as for stealing a copy of a will. And I'm not making that up, it's ridiculous as it sounds. That's the but in practical sense, when someone goes to court, it's treated the same as stealing a television or a laptop or your mobile phone. In other words, a slap on the wrist. We argue that firearm owners can lose their license, can actually be charged or go to jail simply for not storing their firearms correctly. If it's that important that we have to store them and we have to buy a $1,000 safe or whatever to put them in, surely to goodness we should be trying to discourage real criminals from stealing them by having increased penalties and also pursuing them when they are perhaps in another state or something like that.
Well, I agree. I actually, look, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a lawmaker, and I didn't realise what the laws were, but I was absolutely dumbfounded when I found out that these guys did not even get fined or charged in any way, shape or form. All the police told me was, should these guys come back to Queensland, I'll get them. Well, I doubt these guys will inform the police that they're coming back to Queensland, so I don't think they're going to be got. But, you can steal a toaster or a television set or somebody's wedding ring. You cannot commit a crime with those things. You can commit a crime with a firearm. Firearms, we have to abide by very stringent conditions for our right to own a firearm, and it is a right to own a firearm. We're entitled to own one, but there are responsibilities with that, and I have no problem with that at all. And we must abide by those responsibilities. And those responsibilities are put in place for the very reason that a firearm is more than just a toy. It is a serious piece of equipment, and they must be treated seriously. And if the law does not treat people who steal them seriously, they've got it wrong.
Someone got it very wrong. Recently, in fact early this year, the National Firearms Agreement 2017 was released out of Justice Minister Keenan's office, and myself and a lot of others had actually worked with that office over the last couple of years, giving input, things which was all totally ignored. Not one word of all the suggestions they were given was included. And then we read through it when we got it, and there's not one word in here, not one word about criminal misuse of firearms and addressing it. It's all about additional restrictions and punishments of licensed firearm owners, of legitimate firearms users. And I know, Jim, that you and I have had discussions about this, and Steve Dixon, your state One Nation leader, has had discussions about this. This is something that really horrifies us. We look in here and we see, if this is implemented, and the current government in Queensland has signed off on this, has agreed to implement this, and I saw a letter from the Premier just as late as last week saying that they are obligated by the National Firearms Agreement. Well, legally they're not obligated, but then why would you sign something that you didn't have a plan to implement? And when I start going through this thing and looking, and I start seeing probably 70 to 80%, maybe 90, as high as 90% of the number of shooting clubs in this state would be put out of business if this is brought into the letter of how it's written, which it should be, because it says right in here the states shall and must enact these. And even though it's got no legal grounds to force that, it's got, I guess, a moral ground because they signed it and agreed to do it. Ammunition restrictions, and as a former farmer, you know about the difficulties with animal control, pest control, feral animal control, and I think you even do a little bit of pest control.
I do a little bit, yes, for some councils, yes.
So Jim's got experience with this. If they started reducing the amount of ammunition that people could get, pest controllers, farmers would be seriously, their efforts would be seriously damaged. Also, competition target shooters like David behind the camera, I mean, they could easily go through 500, 600, 700 rounds a week leading up to a major competition if they were participating at a national or international competition, just getting ready for it. So the thought that, oh, well, Jim, you can have one box of 22s this week, but that's all, would do two things. One, it would greatly reduce feral animal control, and two, it would radically increase the pricing, because most of you would know who watching this that if you went in and bought one packet of ammunition for, say, $20 for a box of bullets, if you bought 1,000 rounds of that, you might pay almost half that. And that's a massive difference, especially if you're using it commercially, but it's also if you're using it, like David, competitively.
Yeah, now I wish I could say I could go to the international level and compete.
I was being nice to him.
but some of my club members represent Australia. You know, guys like Dave McConaughey and mental blank. What's the young lad? Carla Blowers. I mean, they're off to France in about a few days' time. Those guys would go through serious ammo. Now, you put restrictions in place, and I'll play devil's advocate. Would that create a black market for ammunition if you'd hit your limit?
Of course it would.
You know, Graham, I need some 9mm. Can you buy it for me?
Yeah, of course it would.
So it's just a flawed idea.
But it's in here. I'm a firearm safety instructor, so I do the safety courses for people. And doing that, a lot of the ones we do are with younger people, teenagers and stuff, to teach them safety. And especially in regional areas, it's really important around farming communities because these kids are around firearms a lot. And it's really critical that you teach them some safety, just like it is around vehicles or chainsaws or other things. This document, this piece of garbage, in my opinion, this what it does is actively say that's banned. If the states enact this, if Queensland brings this in, you won't have any more miners' license. We won't be able to do safety training for miners. That to me would, you live in a regional area, I mean, and as someone who's been around firearms, what would you say if the government says, oh, you can't teach miners about gun safety anymore, they can't get a miner's license so they can use one safely?
Well, when I was 15 years old for my birthday, my father bought me my first rifle. It was a Creco bolt action 22. I still have it, and I still use it for professional shooting to this very day, and it's still accurate. But I was 15, I'd go into Robinson's sports store in George Street, which is no longer there anymore, and I'd buy myself 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 boxes of 22, 50 a box, take them down to our farm at Gympie, and I'd shoot the whole lot in a weekend. I'd just shoot and shoot and shoot. I'd shoot at tin cans, but, you know, I really know that rifle backwards, and I shot a lot of rounds. I'd hate to think how many tens of thousands of rounds I've shot through the years. Very little of that was hunting. Most of it was just target practice. All my brothers and sisters used it. My nephews. Now my 11-year-old daughters to this day, when I take them out onto the farm, I show them how to shoot, and they practice with an air rifle. You know, I think that if you don't shoot regularly and you don't shoot a lot, how can you become proficient? I mean, we hear of cases of policemen accidentally shooting themselves in the leg with their Glocks because they're not terribly proficient at using it. We see cases like the Lint Cafe siege where I think 27 rounds were fired and 3 only hit their target, and 2 of them were the wrong target. But I think to become proficient, you must practice, practice, practice. It's whether you're a footballer, whether you're a dancer, whether you're an acrobat, you must practice. And to be a proficient user of a firearm, you must practice. And I think firearms ammunition restrictions are an absolute joke. And I am a licensed, legal, law-abiding gun owner. Are they saying they don't trust me to buy some extra ammunition for whatever purpose I see fit? It is none of their business. If I have a license to own a gun, then I can purchase ammunition for that gun. End of story.
With that, let's want to talk a little bit, or do you have something you want to bring up?
I've got a question that came in before, Graham. Hunting on public land for feral pests, because we've been talking a little bit about feral pests. That's not available in Queensland. What's your views on getting some sort of structure like they do in other states?
I remember writing a piece a couple of years ago about this. New South Wales had the R licence, I believe, is it?
Yes.
In support of that, I think it's a great idea. I mean, landowners are obligated legally to control declared pests on their land.
Yep.
That is a legal obligation, as it is controlling declared weeds. If you don't do it, you can be fined, and or the government can send a contractor in to do it, and you will pay the bill for that said contractor. And yet, on public lands where we have more weeds and more feral pests than on private land, the government does nothing about it because of the cost. They can't afford it. Now, that's probably, you know, on occasions it's probably a valid argument. There's not an unlimited amount of money in the world. However, if you've got fox, cat, pig, wild dog problems on public land, why not allow people who will do it for free, who can do it well, who are trained and even if it might be, they might have to be approved by a shooting organisation as competent.
That's what the R licence in New South Wales does.
Which is the case in New South Wales. I think it's an excellent idea.
Because we put people through that R licence course ourselves, because a lot of Queenslanders go across the border into it. In fact, when Steve Dixon, who's the One Nation leader in Queensland, was formerly a minister in the LNP government.
Correct.
He was in charge of national parks for a little while, and he actually was, we got to give him credit, he was championing that at the time.
Yeah.
And that it could be done in national state-owned areas and things. We're one of the only states that actually doesn't. It's quite unusual. New South Wales has, I think it's in the millions of acres now of land, that public land that is used, and they nominate, if there's a problem with pigs at that time, they'll nominate pigs as a thing you can go in there and hunt. I think it's a great way to have a really low cost, basically free. In fact, they pay you for the license.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. New Zealand, does the same thing. Canada does the same thing. Many countries that have pest control problems do that.
I think the reason we don't have that in Queensland, I think we all know it, is because we have a government, whether it was Labor or the previous LNP government, that is city-centric. The old National Party of Joe Bielka-Peterson, that was the National Party that I was a member of, is dead and buried. Unfortunately, Joe's gone, and so is his National Party. It's gone. That was the National Party I was a member of. I loved it. It was great. It's gone. It's never coming back again. It is now the Liberal Party. It's called the LNP. It should just be the LP. It's a Liberal Party. It's city-based, and they would rather listen to a doctor in George Street's wife, or the Greens, people who've never set foot off the concrete. They don't go out into the bush. Farmers and shooters know more about the animals and the environment than these people, that tread the concrete and protest. And yet, as long as those people hold the ears of our politicians, we're not going to get the changes we need. We can't change them. We just need to get rid of them.
Totally agree.
Just got another question come in, and this is a West Australian-oriented question. Comes from the lovely Mary Ann on the Gold Coast. I think Graham and I both know who that is.
Hi, Mary Ann.
This is in relation to restrictions on transport of firearms via Australia Post, where over there it's got to be... freight companies are highly regulated by the West Australians. I mean, we don't want to go down that sort of road here. What's your view on trying to minimise restriction and putting compliance roadblocks in front of businesses, because that adds a cost to the entire industry as well, and that applies to ammunition and
that's interesting because it is raised in
Correct.
This once again piece of garbage referred to as the 2017 National Firearms Agreement. And if a politician's watching who doesn't like the way I disrespect this document, I'm happy on any media anywhere in this country to debate it line by line with you. In fact, it will be my pleasure. We'll fly there at our expense to do it. And let's just see. But you may want to read it before you do it, because what you think it is and what it is isn't. And so in there it actually addresses this to some degree, in that it says that they've got to bring in laws that make firearms and ammunition be shipped separately. They're already shipped separately, but they can be shipped in the same shipment. So in other words, you might have a pallet coming from a wholesaler to a dealer, and on that pallet is firearms in sealed containers and ammunition in sealed containers. They're put on the pallet together for shipping costs. What this is interpreted as saying is that they would have to be separate, which would then incur totally separate shipping costs, which are borne by the local dealer, which actually are borne by the customer.
Yeah.
And from regional areas, I would think it's... And can you see any sense of
I would
that?
ask, what's the benefit?
Yeah.
There's no benefit, there's only a cost.
There's no problem with what's happening now.
I can remember back in the day ordering ammunition, I think it was from Horsley Park Gun Shop, and they'd put it on the train, and it'd come to Bow Desert, and I'd go down to the station, it'd be, the box would be there at the siding. Now, that's not going to happen anymore, I accept that, but it travelled in a wagon along with everything else that was coming up. That's just ridiculous.
Another good question.
Don't agree with it.
Another good question just bounced in here, guys. What about managed duck hunting? And that's something that disappeared from the landscape a while back.
Yes, well, certainly we're in favour of it, but I'm not sure. We haven't had this discussion.
Was it you I mentioned? I was talking to somebody just this week. I thought it might have been you. I was asking somebody how long since we've had a duck season in Queensland, and it's been quite some time. I can't remember.
More than 10 years.
But look, I can remember reading figures from, these are American figures, but the situation would be the same here. At the end of the summer, when the ducks breed up, if it's a good summer, the ducks will breed up, there will be large numbers of them. By the end of winter, 80% of all the ducks have died of starvation, because there's not enough food to support them. There's less food in winter than summer. So if you have 100 ducks at the end of summer, in autumn, come spring there will be 20 ducks left. And at the end of the next summer, they will have bred up to 100 again. It's the cycle of life. Yes. Most die during the winter. If you had a duck season in the autumn and you shot 20 of those 100 ducks, that would leave 80 ducks. 60 of them would die during the winter, and there'd still be 20 left in the spring. the animals can only survive according to the food supply available to them. If there's that much food, that many ducks survive. If you have that many ducks going into the winter, they will still be starved down to the lower number. So taking a harvest, it's just like I'm a cattle breeder. When you breed your calves in the spring, you can't keep doing it every year. You have to cull your stock and sell them, otherwise they will all starve to death. So I don't see any reason. Now look, if there's an extraordinarily bad summer and the wildlife weren't able to breed, the ducks couldn't breed, well, you'd regulate it according to, it's a bit like the kangaroo tag quota system. The government experts, they look at the kangaroo numbers, they decide what numbers can be culled without affecting the population, and they issue that number of tags accordingly. And you have to buy the tag, so the government makes money out of it, not to mention the millions of dollars of export money that we get from the roo shooting, and revitalising some of the small rural towns where often the roo shooting was the only business they had going, especially for young unemployed blokes.
In drought time.
And the ducks, so I don't see any reason why we can't have a duck season, provided it's regulated, provided it's done sensibly, with expert advice. And in America, I believe the National Parks and Wildlife Service make 80% of their income from levies and fees and charges from the shooters and the fishers. They actually provide the bulk of the money, which is used for protecting wildlife.
And in New Zealand, the situation is somewhat similar.
Yeah.
They make a lot of the revenue that the wildlife management uses is actually from hunters through sustainable hunting and ecological control of pests that otherwise breed up and cause problems. And it just makes a lot of sense to me. I'm glad we raised that. Thank you for whoever sent the question in. Is there another question before I go on to?
No.
Okay.
Go for
I want to get into a little bit about One Nation Queensland policy. And this, folks, is the particular policies to Queensland. So if you want to see them, you can go on the One Nation site, but then you go into the Queensland area.
Yes.
And you look at their policies, because each state firearms laws are set by states, and so therefore each state will have its own policy, which is appropriate for that. And I know that you were one of the people that's worked on the One Nation Queensland policy along with Steve Dixon and others.
Yep.
Can you talk us through a little bit about your policy?
Yeah, sure, Grant. Well, it's interesting. We were just talking about the National Firearms Agreement. Now, the National Firearms Agreement, by definition, is national. And as you stated, firearms laws are a state issue. So how can we have the federal government telling the states what our firearms laws are?
We shouldn't.
I mean, we have state laws. Now, the Labor government have signed the NFA, which means, as you said earlier, if they sign it, must mean they agree with it. Now, I don't believe the LNP have signed it, but they haven't committed one way or the other. Now, it's none of the federal government's business. It is a state issue. Just as the federal government intervened in 1996 with the states, and the states rolled over, just like the government's done here in Queensland yet again. But we don't believe, and One Nation certainly don't believe, and we will not accept the federal government telling us what to do in our own backyard. Thank you very much. As far as our policies, and I have to thank various people within the shooting industry we did consult with the shooting industry. Unlike the National Firearms Agreement you just mentioned, that you said you went to Canberra and you met with all the stakeholders. Now what they say is, and this is a trick that all the political parties do, they talk to people and they say, we've consulted with you now. They ignore what you say, come up with their laws, and they say, we've done this and we've consulted with everybody. What they don't mention is, we didn't take any bloody notice of them, but we did consult with you. And that's the same thing with the NFA. We have consulted with the shooting industry, and with their help and their input, which really don't differ from our own core beliefs anyway, we have formulated our new policies, which don't differ much from what we already had. I guess one of the big differences is now with the change in technology. Once upon a time, all firearms licences were done by the weapons licensing branch by hand. All paperwork. Well, that's gone now. Everything's been modernised and it's all technologically advanced, and it's done electronically. And I think probably the highlight of our policy is the LIVS, the License Instant Verification System, which was not our idea. It was suggested to us, it was brought to us, but it gelled perfectly with my own belief that the PTA system can be done away with. I believe once you have jumped through the hoops, dotted the I's and crossed all the T's, and and passed all the background checks, the criminal checks, the character checks, whether you're crazy or you're some sort of a monster, once you passed all the requirements to qualify to obtain a weapons license, a bit like when you obtain a car license, I don't believe you need to jump through these hoops again to buy a second weapon. Just like if you want to buy a new car, you don't have to sit for another car license. You don't have to
Correct.
apply to buy a car because you've already proven you're capable of driving. So what we propose is that once you have a weapons license, and for example you've got a license for Category A and Category B, if you wish to purchase another firearm that's either Category A or Category B, you can go straight to a gun shop and you can say, thank you, I'll have that bolt action 22, thank you very much. You produce your weapons license. He then, a bit like the way they check your credit card when you want to go to the shop and buy something, he will then scan that, and that will give him an up-to-date, immediately up-to-date, within the last 24 hours, of whether you have had any criminal convictions, whether you have had a black mark put against you by the police. It's very similar to what the nightclubs use in the Valley in Brisbane,
Yep.
and in Townsville and in Cairns, I believe, where they scan people, and if they've done anything wrong in the past, they're in the system. When they scan it at the door, they come up, yeah, this guy was a troublemaker, he got drunk and picked a fight last time, he's not allowed entry. It's instant. So it's quicker than the current system, and it means you can go in there, you hand your license to the firearms dealer, he scans it, as long as you come up clean, you can buy that weapon on the spot.
The beauty of that too, for those watching, is this: the PTA system is not real time. So once you're issued a PTA, a permit to acquire, that piece of paper is good for 6 months. If you got arrested or had a domestic violence order against you or something
Correct.
like within that 6 months, you've still got that piece of paper and can go into a gun shop and pick up a gun.
That's
what
right.
this system you're proposing, and that's been developed out there and has been suggested to a number of bodies, is that this will be a real-time system. So if you got in trouble last night, you would actually walk into the gun shop the next day and be disallowed. It's really much better for public safety.
It's
than
much
the existing.
safer, and it's cheaper, and it frees up a whole lot of policemen who are sitting on their backsides in Brisbane doing paperwork and not getting out there and do what they want to do, which is doing policing work.
Yeah.
So, and it's a win-win situation. At the moment, if you go to a gun show and you see a beautiful rifle, you just got to have it. It's got your name on it. Well, then you've got to go away and you've got to apply for a PTA and you've got to wait and you've got to go through all the hoops, and why do I want it?
And there's the cost. I mean, it adds cost
Yeah.
of $30-some it is right now. And the interesting thing about that, people would say, oh, well, it'll actually cost money because the government won't get that money. Well, every time the government takes in money, it actually costs them, the estimate is it costs them $70 or $80 to process it
Yeah.
when they take in money because of all their procedures. So by not having to take in money to do it, you would... Sounds
That's right.
counterintuitive, but you're actually freeing people up. You would save money by not having a charge system.
Well, you're freeing up a bunch of human beings, and
Yeah.
the computer doesn't get a salary. So, and the other thing is too, I use the example of being at a gun show. That dealer who has that gun, he may come from interstate.
Yep.
And so then when you finally get your permit, whenever it arrives, weeks, months later, then he's got to ship it.
Yes.
We were talking about shipping
Yep,
firearms.
good.
Then you've got to go through the whole process of shipping it to you because he's 1,000 miles away.
And as Marianne said, they want to put more and more restrictions
Yeah.
on that, and there's no need, there's not any evidence that guns are going missing in transport, but this would eliminate even some of that.
Correct.
Because of that nature, there would be less firearms being shipped and transported around the country because of that. Now, what else about your policy? What's some other, pick a highlight or something you see in there that I think that is, I agree with you about that. There's also the issue that a lot of our members raise, especially rural ones, that of pest control and of using 22s or shotguns that are currently what's called Category C, which would be 22 rimfire, semi-automatics or pump-action shotguns or semi-automatic shotguns for competition or for pest control. Do you have a position on that, or what's your feeling? I'm not talking about military semi-autos. I'm talking about P-rifles, you know.
Yeah. Well, look, I know you can obtain a semi-automatic sporting rifle if you get the correct category. They are available now, but the police are making it harder and harder for you to justify having that. Now, I think one of the biggest things at the moment, one of the biggest concerns that we're hearing about from some of our very far western areas is that landowners who have an H licence,
yes,
which
is a handgun licence,
which is essential for some people because they're either on horseback or on motorbike. Now, if you're riding on a motorbike and you've got a rifle stuck in a scabbard and you take a fall, you're probably going to break your rifle.
Or yourself.
Or yourself. And the same thing goes on a horse. Now, a lot of these guys use handguns because if they're riding through the property, they come across a beast with a broken leg, or he's stuck in a bog, or he's injured, or he's sick, or he's dying, or whatever, they can get off and shoot him. And which is what.
So, what's One Nation's position on occupational use of?
We believe that it should continue the way it is. It is my understanding that some landowners who have gone to renew their existing licence, which they've obtained legally, when they've gone to renew their existing licence, they have been given an awful lot of resistance. They've been asked, "Oh, well, look, you don't really want it. You should give it up. It's going to be hard to get." The weapons licensing have made it so difficult for them that a lot of them have been led to believe they're not going to get it renewed, and so they have handed it in and forfeited their Category H licence.
True.
The government are now saying, well, the police are telling us that people don't want their Category H, they're handing them in. So this is, which is a nonsense. People are being made forced to a situation where they give up and hand it in. Then the government says, look, people don't want it anymore, they're handing it in. So they're making it happen.
I can tell you that AgForce, the group that represents primary producers in this state, is just tearing their hair out with the number of complaints about this. And certainly AgForce, I know, is lobbying all parties that are running in the next state election and the current government to say, hey, wait a minute, these guys, some of them have licenses 20, 30, 40 years. They're obviously not a threat to public safety because they've had it for years, and suddenly they go to renew. Not one circumstance has changed, and you say, no, we're not renewing it.
Yeah. Well, they won't have to lobby One Nation because we're already on their side. Won't have to do it.
Got some comments coming in here, and one of them's a really good one about Category C, D and H on a property. And this is a bit like the Cat H thing, where things have been pushed, where employees and or family members, because family members often are unpaid employees.
Yes.
We need to look at how we sort out the issue of people on a property licence, or people with a licence on a property, but having family members being able to access and use those firearms for that purpose on the property.
Currently, under the Act, an employee, which can include a family member, it doesn't have to have a pay slip or something, an employee, person doing work on a property may use a firearm while they're unlicensed on that property. They cannot take it off that property, they cannot use it off that property, and one of the challenges a lot of property owners find is when they own several pieces of land, as Jim would be aware, sometimes you've got to cross public roads in order to get from one piece to the other, and at that point the person needs a license. Even if it's literally crossing 20 feet of road, that's a no-no. And so there is some challenges with that, and there's been real challenges for a lot of employees getting licenses in the categories of C or D or H when they've needed them because of that travelling from one lot to another. And as you know, it's not uncommon when farmers want to expand and they have one block, they buy one next door or down the road, and sometimes you just got to go, you might be on the road for 60 seconds, but...
Well, surely you would like to think that common sense could prevail here. If you've got a property here and another one across the road, surely you could make some sort of an arrangement with the police and get approval to cross the road with your firearm. I mean, it's not
It's not rocket science.
It's not rocket science. It gets down to common sense. You just need some goodwill on both sides.
I think, Graham, you would have had with AgForce people having their condition codes changed.
Yes.
So you can keep the gun, you can keep the license, but your employees or family members can't use it anymore. And
There is a lot of this is happening a lot, Jim. Is what people are getting licenses back, particularly with CD and H. They're getting licenses back where suddenly the conditions have changed, and you've got a category H for occupational purpose. Oh, but by the way, you can't use that to shoot feral animals. They've just changed it on the condition, or they changed something else. You're no longer a primary producer, you're just a rural occupation person, which does have some implications. But all these condition changes being made with no reference back to the user groups such as AgForce and things. How does One Nation feel about consulting with user groups and having, like we used to have under previous governments, and we do again at the moment under the current police minister, but is real legitimate advisory groups that take on board concerns like this, like we're discussing.
It's a no-brainer. I mean, obviously, I was at Parliament House this afternoon with Steve Dixon because a number of farmers from the Lockyer Valley had some issues they wanted to talk to him about. So, I mean, of course you have to talk to the stakeholders. I mean, I don't know everything about the fire. I mean, my personal use of firearms now is mostly recreational, and I do a little bit of professional shooting, but it's mostly recreational. There are other people who live in totally different circumstances from me. And, some circumstances are ones that I wouldn't have even imagined until you come across them. I mean, we just have to have some common sense. Now, a One Nation government or a government that has One Nation holding the balance of power, apart from the fact that we want to implement our current firearms laws as they are, we will form an advisory body and we will be consulting with all the stakeholders.
In fact, in your policy, it does say you'll do that within the first 12 months.
Yes.
Having some sort
and
of...
And I mean, why would you want to make policy in a vacuum? Because one, you're probably going to get it wrong. Two, you're probably going to offend all the people who are affected by it. And then all you're going to do is create policies that may not be effective, and you're only going to upset everybody who those policies affect. You must negotiate with the stakeholders.
I was talking to some of your candidates recently. One was Mark Higgins.
From Gregory,
yes.
It's the biggest electorate in Queensland.
Okay.
I think the Mount Isa, Robbie Catters used to be, but Gregory's now bigger with the boundary changes. I think it goes right out to South Australia. The reason I was talking to him is he's asking questions so he can better work with people in that electorate. Yeah. And I was also talking with... I believe Mark's also a firearms instructor.
He's a firearms instructor, so he's pretty aware of this. I was also talking with the candidate up at Bundaberg, Jane Truscott and her husband, and they were very interested in getting this sort of feedback and that sort of information. And I know you've got one up. It's in Mackay Way.
That'd be Steve Andrews from Marani,
And he's actually a registered dealer, but he's a professional pest controller.
Yeah.
And he's been asking some very, very interesting questions back and forth. So we are getting some input already from what you're saying about a consultative approach.
So I've got a question as a genuine member. Given that you guys have had good engagement with some prospective MP or prospective candidates for the next election, what is it that the voters, our members, can do to help that cause in terms of preferences, in terms of turning up to help on election days? What sort of positive things can the folk listening and watching do to help?
Well, I'll give you my opinion, then you can do yours as a candidate. My opinion is there's two things. If you're committed to helping change and improve the current situation, because what is happening right now is it's just slowly getting worse and worse for firearm owners. It's like death by small cuts. That to improve that, and you're serious about it, when you're going to have the election, say to yourself, I'm going to devote 2 or 3 hours and go find a candidate in your area or near your area, if it's not right in your electorate, who is pro-firearms. And if they're a One Nation candidate, great. If they're with KAP, Robbie Catter or Shane Knuth, one of those guys in KAP, if they're those, great. Or if there's other candidates, either independent or from the LNP or something, who are genuinely pro-firearm, who will stand up for shooters, go out and get yourself volunteered to help hand out how to vote cards and things on the day. Help them on the day, because there's lots of voting booths. And it's very hard for the candidates, especially some from the non-major parties, to get enough people to man all those booths. And that, in 2 or 3 hours, you can really help pro-firearm candidates out. We're actually setting up a database, and you'll be able to, it'll be on our website, and we'll be sending out emails to all members very shortly, so that you can register your interest in helping, and then we'll contact you when the election's called and give you some advice on who we think is the most pro-firearms candidate in your election. That's one. The second is preferences. This election is compulsory preferential. In the past, in Queensland state elections for the past number of years, you could either put preferences or not. That's not an option this time. If you don't number all the boxes, your vote won't count. The biggest thing that I see is you've got to put in our case, the major parties last. Put Labor last, unless they have a change of heart and come to Jesus and see the light.
Pigs are flying.
Yeah, I don't know, but put Labor last. Why? Because they're the ones that want to implement this in the worst way, and then work your way down. And let's say you're in Jim's electorate, and you said Jim's a genuine pro-firearms policy. He's not just going to spout the words and when he gets in do nothing, which is what politicians seem to do. No offence.
None taken.
But that's what they do, right? Blah, 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 blah. I'm your friend, vote for me. They're in, who are you? You know, they forget us. So let's assume we figure you're in his electorate, you figure he's genuine, put him as number one. And let's say there was a guy running from an independent who was pro-firearms. You might put him as, but you weren't quite as sure. So you put him as number 2. And then you might put, say, the LNP as number 3. And then you might put someone else.
A Green.
Someone asked me about this the other day. They said, you can't say vote Labor last because you'd want to put the Greens last. No Green is going to get elected in any seat in Queensland in the next state election. Ain't going to happen. The only Lotto, if Lotto happens and they get one, it's going to be in Jackie Trad's seat in South Brisbane. And the difference between Jackie and a Greens candidate, who cares? But if you're in that seat, sorry, I hate to tell you, you're not going to get a pro-firearms candidate running most likely, and they won't win. So, but realistically, number them all and start with the most pro-firearms candidate, and we will have a list. In fact, LAFO, the organisation, Law Abiding Firearm Owners Inc., has just produced a little flyer with their current picks and of who to vote for in what order. But it does depend on your seat and you know what electorate you're in, because you may get someone who's in a party that talks nice things about gun law reform, but that candidate's not that motivated. Whereas you may have another candidate there as an independent or someone from a small party who maybe their party policies aren't that, but this person is passionate about it. And one of the reasons we're talking to Jim is because of his background in firearms. He actually understands the issues. And he's been able to work with people like Shell Dobson up at Gympie, which is a high firearms owning area. And Shell didn't really know a lot about firearms stuff.
She didn't, and Rob Neuer, and you took us along to Rob Neuer's facility, and Shell fired a lever action, an Adler. Yeah,
she wanted another go.
She wants one, and you know,
but she took the time to learn, and because of people like Jim, she was getting those candidates that weren't opposed to firearms. They just didn't know much about them, and now you've got someone in that Gympie area who would take a stand on behalf of firearms. I know she's been working, meeting up there. She's met Ron Owen up there, who's well known in that area for pro-firearms support and things like that. So that's my take on how our members could help. What's yours as a candidate?
Well, you know, just
other than vote for you.
Well, vote for me, of course. You just mentioned Shell Dobson and Gympie. If Shell gets elected and One Nation holds the balance of power in the next election, there will be the rifle range in Gympie. They've been talking about it for 30 years. Nothing's happened. We will. It's on government land. We will make that land available for $1 a year rent, whatever it is, for 99 years, and they can then build a world-class facility there. So they can have international events there, and because Gympie, like all these regional areas, they're doing it tough, and have a world-class, pistol, rifle, shotgun, the whole lot there. It'll really make a big difference. It would bring in
millions and millions a year to that Wide Bay region.
Yeah. But to answer your question, what you can do to help? Well, obviously, we'd like you to vote for One Nation because that's why we're here. But and as you mentioned, Graham, we're a smaller party. We don't have the massive funding. All our candidates, I'll say this right now, every single One Nation candidate is self-funded. We do not get 1 cent from the party or the taxpayer or the Electoral Commission. We are self-funded, 100%. So most of our candidates are working full-time and campaigning full-time with their own funds. They're doing it because they mean it and they believe it. I'd have to be one of the most stubborn bastards that there ever was. I'm half Irish, I'm very argumentative, and the other half is Scottish, so I'm very stubborn. I do not change my mind easily, and if I say I will support something, I always do. I've been 100% behind firearms, own the right to own a firearm since I was 15 years old. Nick Harvey, I grew up reading his stories, and I had the pleasure of meeting him not long ago, which was great. But we really do, booth workers are very important for us because in an electorate like mine, where you've got 30 electorates and you probably need 4 people, 30 booths, you need 4 to a booth, there's 120 people. You probably need 200 people. In some of the really large areas like Gregor that you just mentioned, the candidate might be 1,000 kilometres away from one booth. He can't be at them all. So people, and look, I've had people come to me over the years and been very, very, very strong about and demanding, we want our guns, we want this, we want that. And I say, what have you done about it? Oh, well, nothing. Have you joined the Sporting Shooters? No. Have you joined a shooting union? No. Have you supported a political party that helps you? No. Well, I feel like saying, well, then bugger off and do something, because you sit back and you just want it to happen. If you want to keep your guns and you want the laws to go back the other way, you want to start stopping the rot, I would ask you, find a candidate that's pro-gun and, as Graham said, back them.
I can't add any more to that. I'm just going to say thank you very much for
You're most welcome.
being with us.
And look, I'd like to give you, this is the last personally autographed Pauline Hanson One Nation hat. I only wore it in here. It is clean. I'd like to give it to you, Graham, and may you wear it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Wow, that's a collector's item.
Yeah, and it'll be worth even more once you've had it on your head and you could auction it off.
I doubt that.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone, for taking the time to tune in.